On the night of December 16th, 1811, without any warning or small tremors to signal the coming chaos, the very earth in the center of America began to swallow everything whole. Within the first 320 seconds of this massive seismic event, the ground cracked into deep fissures dozens of meters long, pulling massive trees down into the dark abyss. Sand spouted from the earth like terrifying geysers, while the church bells in Boston, more than 1,600 kilometers away, began to ring violently on their own for several long hours. Perhaps the most incredible detail, recorded by witnesses on the first steamship in history, was that the mighty Mississippi River actually stopped its flow and then began rushing backward toward the north. But that was 1811, when the entire region was just a dense wilderness of ancient forests and a few hundred settlers trying to survive in a harsh and new land. Now, in the year 2024, there are more than 12 million people living, working, and sleeping soundly every single night directly on top of that very same deadly earthquake epicenter. This is not California, where people grow up knowing the ground might move. Here, in the quiet heartland, they have no idea they are sitting on a massive geological time bomb. The most terrifying aspect is not the earthquake itself, but the chain of collapse that the Federal Emergency Management Agency calls the greatest economic catastrophe in the entire history of America. In this video, we will explore why the most peaceful region of the United States is actually the most dangerous place to be when the sleeping giant finally decides to wake. You will see why the East Coast could lose all heating within 24 hours and why, after 215 years of silence, this monster is closer than ever before. We are standing on the edge of a disaster that could split the nation in half, severing vital supply lines and plunging millions into a dark and frozen reality overnight. Prepare to witness the hidden truth about the new Madrid Seismic Zone, a threat so massive it defies imagination and challenges everything we thought we knew about our own safety. If you want to understand why New Madrid is so dangerous, you must first understand the massive economic empire that stands directly on top of this sleeping geological giant. Every single night, between the hours of 10 in the evening and 5 in the morning, Memphis transforms into the busiest and most critical cargo airport on the entire planet. More than 250 flights land and depart, while massive conveyor belts stretching over 300 miles process nearly 500,000 packages every single hour. These goods are processed within a complex spanning over 727 acres and sent to more than 220 different countries across the globe. Beyond the skies, Memphis is one of only 4 cities in America served by 5 different major railways, with over 200 freight trains passing through every single day. As the 4th largest inland port in the nation, it moves over 11 million tons of essential cargo annually along the dark and powerful waters of the Mississippi River. Memphis is not just another city. It is the vital heart that pumps lifeblood into the entire American economy, handling every electronic device you ordered online last night. Moving north, we find St. Louis, the historic gateway to the West, which now serves as a massive industrial and financial anchor for the entire middle of the country. Both of these great cities have expanded for nearly 200 years in total silence, with no major tremors felt since the legendary events of 1812. It is precisely this long period of absolute stillness that has created a deadly trap, luring millions into a false sense of security while the pressure builds below. In California, every skyscraper is built with advanced steel frames and seismic dampers. But in the Midwest, most buildings were constructed long before modern earthquake standards existed. Thousands of structures are made of old brick and unreinforced masonry, the exact type of material that engineers warn will crumble instantly when the first seismic waves arrive. Even after decades of expert warnings, the adoption of strict building codes remains completely voluntary in many local counties, leaving the population exposed to a sudden collapse. They have built a sprawling modern empire on a foundation of loose dirt, but the true nightmare lies in the specific geological nature of the ground beneath their feet. New Madrid is unlike any other fault line on the planet, and we are about to discover the fatal flaw that makes this region a unique trap for civilization. When the ground finally gives way, the very infrastructure that makes this region so powerful will become the instrument of its own sudden and absolute destruction. This is the illusion of stability, a golden age of logistics and growth that ignores the violent history and the inevitable future of the Earth cracking wide open. Every package, every train, and every bridge in this region is part of a delicate system that could be severed in less than 100 seconds of shaking. Forget everything you thought you knew about earthquakes, because New Madrid does not function like the famous faults you see on the news every single year. Deep beneath the peaceful American heartland lies a massive geological scar known to scientists as the Reelfoot Rift, a failed break in the continental crust. Over 600 million years ago, the North American continent attempted to pull itself apart right here, but the process stopped, leaving a permanent wound deep inside. Unlike the San Andreas Fault in California, where two tectonic plates rub together, this is an intraplate fault, hidden entirely within the solid center of a single plate. Because it is buried so deep, it is much harder to predict and even more difficult to monitor than the faults located on the edges of the continent. When this ancient wound finally erupts, the energy does not dissipate quickly. Instead, it travels through the ground in a way that is uniquely terrifying and destructive. California sits on solid, ancient rock that absorbs seismic waves, but the American Midwest is covered by a deep, soft layer of river sediment from the Mississippi. This layer of loose soil is between 30 and 60 meters thick, accumulated over 60,000 years of flooding and natural erosion across the massive central river plains. Instead of absorbing the shock, this soft sediment actually amplifies the vibrations, causing the ground to shake much more violently than it would in the Western Mountains. According to historical records, the 1811 earthquake was felt in Boston and Connecticut, which is more than 1,000 miles from the actual center of the shaking. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was only felt within 350 miles, showing how much further the New Madrid energy can travel. This brings us to the most horrifying mechanism of all, a geological phenomenon known as soil liquefaction, which can turn solid ground into liquid mud in seconds. When saturated soil is shaken violently, the water trapped between the particles is forced upward, causing the dirt to lose all structural integrity and behave like a liquid. During the Great 1811 event, an entire island in the Mississippi River, where a steamship crew had anchored for the night, vanished completely beneath the dark water. The United States Geological Survey confirms that this liquefaction process affected at least 15,000 square kilometers during the last major sequence of quakes in 1812. In a modern scenario, tens of thousands of buildings will not just collapse, they will simply sink into the ground as the foundation beneath them turns into soup. This brings us to the most critical weakness of the nation: the 15 massive bridges that cross the Mississippi and Ohio rivers directly within the highest danger zone. Critical interstate highways like 40, 55, and 24 all cross over this fault line, and these bridges are expected to become completely unusable immediately after the shock. When these bridges fail, the United States will be effectively cut in half, creating a massive barrier that prevents food, medicine, and fuel from moving between regions. There will be no roads to bring emergency aid into the disaster zone, and there will be no way for millions of survivors to escape the frozen ruins. But the collapse of these bridges is only the beginning, because hidden beneath the soil is a network of veins that sustains the entire East Coast. If these underground lifelines are severed, the consequences will ripple through the country, plunging millions into a cold and dark reality that no one is truly prepared for. We are talking about the vast network of pipelines that transport the energy needed to heat homes and power the industries of the greatest cities in the north. This is the fatal flaw of a nation that has grown too fast and too tall while ignoring the broken and bleeding crust that lies deep beneath its heart. Most people think of falling buildings during earthquakes, but what happens in the hours and days following the event is what will truly change the face of modern America forever. Underneath the shaking soil of the central states lies a hidden network of metal throats that transport oil and natural gas from the Gulf Coast to the massive northern cities. These pipelines were buried in the very dirt that we now know will turn to liquid mud, meaning they will be twisted and snapped at dozens of points almost instantly. Without these energy lifelines, the entire Northeast corridor, including New York and Boston, will find its supply of heating and electricity cut off in the middle of a freezing winter. Within the first 60 minutes, the regional power grid will lose all stability as pumping stations fail and the Memphis airport becomes a silent graveyard of grounded and broken cargo planes. 6 hours into the crisis, nearly 130 hospitals will be damaged, while 2 million people search for shelter without any roads to lead them to safety. By the 12th hour, natural gas reserves in the northern distribution stations will begin to vanish, turning an infrastructure failure into a humanitarian disaster as the temperatures start to drop. After 24 hours, the entire national supply chain will begin to collapse because the central heart that pumps goods across the nation has stopped beating for the first time. Official reports from the federal government estimate the direct physical damage will reach nearly $300 billion, making it the most expensive natural disaster in the history of the world. To put this into perspective, Hurricane Katrina caused $125 billion in damage, meaning New Madrid could be 4 or 5 times more destructive to the economy. Indirect financial losses could double that amount as global markets realize that the center of the American logistics network has been completely erased from the map in a single day. The financial cost is staggering, but the human cost is far worse, with current federal models predicting nearly 86,000 immediate casualties from the massive collapse of aging urban infrastructure. For a somber comparison, the entire Vietnam War resulted in the deaths of 58,000 American soldiers over many years, a number this earthquake could surpass in just 3 days. These are not just statistics or cold numbers. They represent millions of families whose lives will be shattered by a geological force that has been gathering strength for 200 years. Even after these terrifying projections were presented to the government, very little has been done to fortify the region or prepare the citizens for the inevitable waking of the monster. The final question we must ask is why a modern civilization would choose to build its future on top of a ticking clock that has already reached the final few seconds. Scientists from the Geological Survey do not deny the probability, and they continue to warn that the silent heart of the country is preparing to beat again with terrifying violence. As we look at the quiet streets of the Midwest today, we must realize that the peace we see is nothing more than a temporary mask for the coming total escalation. The clock is ticking toward a moment when the earth will rise up to claim everything we have built, leaving us with nothing but the ruins of an empire on sand. Every scientist at the Geological Survey agrees that the question is no longer if the monster will wake, but exactly when it will decide to open its eyes again. There is a 7 to 10% chance of a massive earthquake occurring within the next 50 years, equivalent to the legendary events that happened back in 1811. If we look at smaller but still destructive events, the probability rises to between 25 and 40% for a magnitude 6.0 event in the coming decades. Historical evidence shows that these sequences of violent shaking happen roughly every 500 years. And the last time the Earth screamed was over 215 years ago. We are currently spending billions of dollars protecting our coastlines from rising seas, while the very heart of our nation sits exposed on a foundation that could liquefy tomorrow. This is a silent crisis where logistics, energy, and millions of human lives are resting on a geological ticking clock that most people choose to ignore because it remains invisible. New Madrid does not send emails or post warnings on social media. It simply waits and accumulates pressure until the tension becomes too much for the broken crust to hold. When the silence finally ends, the only remaining question will not be why this tragedy happened, but why we chose to do absolutely nothing when we had the chance to prepare. Are you living in one of the 8 dangerous states in the impact zone, or do you believe that a 10% chance is small enough to ignore for another lifetime? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have family living in the heart of America, make sure they understand the monster sleeping deep beneath their peaceful homes. Because the ground we walk on is not as solid as it seems, and the heart of the nation might just be a bomb waiting for its time to finally explode.